This is gonna be fun. What's up, gang? Thanks for joining the Undiplomatic Podcast, the show with undiplomatic takes about the foreign policy scene. I'm Van Jackson, and hopefully you can hear me. So, we've had some weird technical issues a couple of live streams ago when I got this new mic. I think it's probably all good right now, or I certainly hope so. So, today is kind of a really fun episode at the bottom of the hour, 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. So in like 30 minutes, I'm going to have Max Reed on. Max Reed is the writer. He's this really awesome like pop culture kind of writer, but like not not in the trivial way that pop culture sounds like. He focuses on like Silicon Valley, technological trends, big tech, and then like the politics that intersects with all of that. It's obviously a lefty guy, and in fact, I cited him in the concluding chapter of the book I had last year, Grand Strategies of the Left. And he's just a very interesting thinker, and he has a way of expressing ideas or packaging ideas that like make sense of the world in a way that I find like pretty useful, you know. And so there's like a power politics in the technology Wired magazine type stuff, and it's useful to have somebody who sort of is dialed into that. So anyways, he'll be on the show at the bottom of the hour. We're going to be talking about a bunch of like defense industry intersections with hey, audio is working. Thank you, Leah Mielo. Chat's on fire already. Okay, so my beat is more on the like defense, foreign policy, geopolitics, and then like secondarily, you know, the actual American politics. But like through all of it, it's sort of class war and power politics. He's coming at it more from the technology side than the defense side, but there's a lot of convergence there. Anyways, that's going to be super fun. That's going to be in 20 some odd minutes. So stick around for that. In the meantime, I wanted to talk more about this whole imperialism thesis. I was like, I'm going to take some credit here. Shout out to myself. So I I was like the first one to call out Trump as an imperialist in like the mainstream discourse. And it's not because I'm you know, geopolitics genius or something. Like the left has recognized, world systems analysts, socialists, some heterodox economists, they have recognized that like I mean, it's a epithet to call America an empire, right? Like that's nothing new. That's fucking as old as time or as old as the new left, you know. That's that is what it is. When you're not treating America as empire as an epithet and you're actually you mean it analytically, there's you're like looking for certain things, and when you see those attributes then you call it out, and that has certain implications for how the world works and what we expect of US foreign policy. Okay, so um, I've recognized for a long time that America has imperial relations with certain parts of the world, and it's hegemonic at a global level. Obviously, the capitalist world system works foremost to the benefit of America, and more narrowly, like America's ruling class, right? So, having that in the back of my head, but then trying to relate that to discussions about foreign policy, it's actually really difficult, like the Foreign Affairs magazine, the establishment's foreign policy journal. I've written for them like 6, 7 times. I'm probably the most radical person that they're willing to publish, and the only reason they're willing to do it historically is because I have social ties to that area, and I have bona fides. I have credentials that the establishment folks kind of recognize because I had worked in the Pentagon at one point, and because I teach the security studies IR type stuff that they like fetishize. That's their grammar, that's their language. So I do that. I write for them when I can, but every time I write for them, you can like look up my old pieces. There's those they expect you to like see the world and use a particular language to describe things in a way that like many leftists would chafe at, like you have to refer to countries as like entities, you speak of like China or America or Russia. You don't speak of their classes ever. You don't refer to class. You don't refer to like foreign policy mandarins or elites or wonks. You don't refer to a technocratic class, So like you imagine the world as these billiard balls of nations that are just black holes, monolithic, whatever, and they just bounce around the world, interacting with each other, and that's it. They're we're that's all that exists in the analysis kind of thing. Occasionally you'll have like a dissection of the president's psyche or something. Um, and so you have to talk, you have, there's like the grammar of national security policy, basically, that you have to respect in order to publish in those places. So there's a little like compromise that comes with trying to publish in those places. But I say all of this because I had my thesis about imperialism in Trump foreign policy, which is an extension, a continuation of imperialism within US foreign policy generally. Like US foreign policy is primacist, and there are some imperial relations and imperial structures within that. Like US foreign policy is far more imperial than I think the Biden administration would like to recognize, or that the Obama administration would have liked to recognize. But it fucking is. And it's easier to see it when it's under Trump. It's easier to see it when Trump does it because he's very mask off about it. And so that's the world that we're living in, And everything that Trump has muttered and uttered, and all of the staff around him, the MAGA cadre who are starting to slot into the various political appointments, everything that they're talking about is being extra about imperialism. And that's in like, oh, Philip Floppy in the chat. How close to affiliate? So I actually have the affiliate. I've cleared the bar for affiliate status, but I've just been busy the last 2 days, so I haven't submitted the paperwork or whatever. That's totally on me. But it's happening. So like I'll probably take care of that stuff later today, and then I will be the grand affiliate status thanks to the watchers, followers, etc. And then subscriptions will be open, and that will be when I hit it really big, make those pennies. So anyways, yeah, so affiliate status, and I have you guys to thank for it. For people who don't know, affiliate status in Twitch means you can like monetize the channel instead of talking into the black hole of the universe for no compensation. And speaking of compensation, if you want to support the pod, the Undiplomatic newsletter is the greatest way to provide material support to the pod. Un-diplomatic.com, un-diplomatic.com. I have great stuff in there, including about yesterday I wrote about Elbridge Colby, who even when like left critics of Bridge Colby, he's been named by Trump as the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy nominee. He served in the Pentagon under Trump. I worked with him in a previous life. He is known as like the most Uber of Uber hawks on China, and he's also like a very waspy blue blood. type. And I've talked about him before, I've written about him before, but I had a piece yesterday because even some left critics of Bridge, who they see a danger in the way that he thinks, but they like inadvertently often launder or sanitize what he's about. And they talk they talk there was a piece in Dropsite News, which is actually a very good news site, but they ran a piece on Bridge that portrayed him as a Republican realist, and like that really waters down the danger in his way of thinking. Like he is the mechanic of World War III. No shit. And like that is not hyperbole. But and Republican realism is not some great thing. You know, it's not something that I co-sign, but it's far tamer than what Bridge is about. And so I feel like it's really important to not make category errors or mischaracterize him, especially not in a favorable way. um, um, so I wrote about that in the newsletter. And yeah, so he's going to be running defense policy for Trump, which is not a surprise. And of course, Uberhawk, so like not a surprise, you know. But that actually kind of dovetails with the like imperialist foreign policy point that I made, or that I started making before I derailed myself. Um, so the imperialist foreign policy, right? Everything that Trump and his minions have said so far, it is there's no other way to more precisely characterize it. And the whole Foreign Affairs magazine thing I was talking about, the reason I brought that up was because I wanted to pitch them basically on this imperialist foreign policy thesis. You know, like the evidence is slotting in, and I saw this. This was like before the last few weeks, like before the holidays. So my Trumperialism piece was before the holidays, and then on an episode of the podcast in I think October, so before Trump even won, it was clear from the campaign his presidential campaign that he was trying to establish an imperialist foreign policy, and that's super damning of ironically Biden's foreign policy, because it is an extension of so-called great power competition. So Biden's foreign policy is it's primacist, but the rhetoric of it is about great power competition, and that primarily foregrounds um, China. I mean, a little bit Russia, I guess, but it's really China. You know, that's what justifies the $895 billion defense budget. You know, that's what justifies $1.7 trillion in nuclear modernization. That's what justifies all the bases and alliances and shit in East Asia and the Pacific. That's actually what justifies America not relinquishing its sphere of influence and its territorial control of actual existing colonies in the Pacific Islands region. You know, so like everything that's dark and sucky about Asia kind of hangs on this notion of great power competition. This is the like rhetorical framework that the Biden guys use, and it justifies a lot of choices that you would also see under an imperialist foreign policy, you know. Um, so, anyways, I was trying to. This is an analytic. We on this show think of imperialism as a pejorative and an epithet, but it's also an analytic. And that's what I was trying to bring to foreign affairs. It did not succeed. There is no way that you're going to publish an anti imperialist screed in an establishment foreign policy journal. You know what I mean? And so I've kind of been like asked out. Like there's nowhere for me to write about this except for the newsletter, because I like maybe in like The Nation or something, I don't know. Like the lefty magazines, the like truly left magazines, there's nothing new in describing imperialism or America as an empire, you know. And that's fair enough, but there are things new, when Trump is being extra about it, when Trump is being mask off about it, there's a difference of grade step. There's a step level, stepwise. There's a fucking difference between Trump's foreign policy that's emerging and Biden's foreign policy. Even though there are lots of continuities, there are still some like really meaningful slash scary differences, and farcical. And so we see that in these utterances that are increasingly obviously fucking imperialist. And so that's a couple of like clips that I want to share that literally just came out in the last like 24 hours, that where Trump is like quadrupling down on this shit, quintupling down on this shit, actually floating using military force over Greenland. So let me share the first of these motherfrickers. Um, yeah, true. All right.
Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time, long before I even.
He was told that we need Greenland for national security purposes. He's been told that for a long time. If you remember, he floated this idea of buying Greenland in 2019, like fucking Louisiana purchase it.
I mean, people have been talking about it for a long time. You have approximately 45,000 people there. People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right to it. But if they do, they
That's not true.
should give it up because we need it for national security. That's for the free world. I'm talking about protecting the free world. You look at
what the fuck does that mean? I'm going to come back to that.
You don't even need binoculars. You look outside, you have China ships all over the place. You have Russian ships all over the place. We're not letting that happen. We're not letting it happen.
What the fuck?
And if Denmark wants to get to a conclusion, but nobody knows if they even have any right, title, or interest. The people are going to probably vote for independence or to come into the United States. But if they did do that, then I would tariff Denmark at a very high level.
You asked your staff to draw plans for.
This is so fucked. Like, he's gonna use tariffs as coercion. That's not totally surprising, you know. This like the statement that it's needed for national security purposes is obviously farcical. It's just randomly securitizing a thing. The thing that's like really troubling is that he's got this bone in his mouth and he's just like not letting it go. And it seems like this is actually going to be a priority for him. And well, there's another clip I'm going to share. This is I'm very troubled by this because because he's been told this since 2019 and possibly even before that, he's clearly being surrounded with what we would call as just like hawks or militarists or jingos, but actually there's a bunch of them who are fucking geopoliticians. And an imperialist foreign policy is a policy of land grabs. And that can take different forms, you know? So I want to circle back to that point in 1 second here. Let me clear that out. There's two more clips. Let me see. You have to, at a certain point, recognize that there's a pattern emerging. Here we go.
$60 trillion worth of assets. We're going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America.
Did you hear about this? The Gulf of America? We're going to unilaterally change the name of the Gulf of Mexico.
Which is a beautiful ring that covers a lot of territory. The Gulf of America, what a beautiful name. And it's appropriate. It's appropriate. And Mexico has to stop allowing millions of people to pour into our country. They could.
Okay, so do you see how like defining the Gulf of America is part of making this securitized anti-immigration case, like which is the justification or the pretext for military action against Mexico, which incidentally is in the right-wing imaginary a kind of proxy conflict against China, right? This is because of the fentanyl comes from China through the trafficker cartels or whatever. There's this false narrative that they have that links the Mexico and immigration problems to great power competition. So this is not something that's like other than great power competition. It's doing great power competition differently. And by differently, I mean both more violently and stupidly. And we have carte blanche to do violence, and everyone's fucking numb to it because we've been supporting a genocide in Gaza for the past year plus. You know, like Naomi Klein said, Gaza has blown a hole in our moral universe, and now anything can drive through it. Right. So that's troubling. But this Gulf of America thing, it rings of a more overtly selfish version of the like greater East Asian co-prosperity sphere of imperial Japan, you know, like the grand geographic construct that subsumes the territories and the sovereignties of others, but we put a nice sheen on it. At least with Imperial Japan, it was like, hey, this is a collective thing. Like, y'all are part of this. Y'all, East Asia, yes, we're colonizing you and shit, but like, we're a family. You know, there ain't no family part in the Trump version. You know, the Gulf of America is like, gimme, gimme, gimme. You know, America want. And that's fucking, that's a problem, you know? And I've seen some like foreign policy intellectuals of the national conservative side, the MAGA side, openly just taking Trump's talking points about this and running with it. I saw a guy shared a fucking like a redrawn map that showed a like basically a greater America that spanned from fucking Greenland down through Mexico and the Panama Canal, and is like this is all just going to be America, and we're gonna, and the question is what are the means, but they're like Trump is putting force on the table explicitly in the case of both the Panama Canal and Greenland, you know. And then he said he's going to do economic, I don't have the video for it, but he said he's going to do economic war against fucking Canada. So hope that fucking people are loving that fucking Five Eyes relationship. There was one more little clip, speaking of like the intellectuals who are justifying this stuff on Trump's behalf. There's this kind of quizzling effort to take whatever Trump mutters and then turn it into a rational construct, you know. And in fact, I think Trump's utterances about all this shit, I think they actually started by people who were geopoliticians or who had a geopolitician sort of read interpretation on world politics, you know, for the sake of capital. And so this last clip here that I'll share before we get into the Max Reed stuff, this is shit that you would have never heard these Republican senators say pre-Trump. But here we go.
We've got to take the Panama Canal back. We've got to do something, because if we were to happen to go...
This is a fucking joke, you know. Nobody on the right, like in mainstream media, was talking about like immigration, but then Trump goes down the golden escalator, and then suddenly they're all talking about immigration. Nobody's talking about the fucking Panama Canal, but then Trump mutters some shit about it, and then suddenly they're all singing from the same hymn, talking about how important it is to fucking seize the Panama Canal.
We've got to take the Panama Canal back. We've got to do something, because if we were to happen to go to war with China over Taiwan, and they were to shut the Panama Canal down, we'd have to go 8,000 to 10,000 miles longer just to get things back to the war zone if we had to go from the East Coast to China.
Wow.
We've got to take the Panama Canal.
Okay, fuck you. So there is, like, I keep saying geopoliticians, you know, for Greenland, for the Panama Canal, and for Taiwan, all three of these places, there's a way of thinking that is it has a directly imperialist, as in like 19th century imperialist genealogy. It's a classical geopolitics. It erases people and it assumes that the only civilization is white and Western, and it conceptualizes the world as places that offer advantage because of resources that you can extract or because they are useful for prosecuting a war. And so if there is a particular geography that is useful in a worst case scenario of war, or if you can fucking loot and plunder it, then they become quote unquote strategically important. And this classical geopolitician way of thinking has drawn, has in its imagination, specifically Taiwan, specifically the Panama Canal, and specifically Greenland. And it's these darkly creative fucks who look and stare real hard at the map, like a map of the world, and they come up with half clever ideas about, or like stories that they can tell based on what the map looks like. And so these three locations are conceived of as quote unquote strategic choke points. The Greenland thing, aside from being a massive piece of land, it's an entry to the Arctic, and the Arctic, as we know, is melting, becoming more accessible, and is extremely resource rich. So resource extraction, right? In World War II, the U.S. military occupied it because it was an important part of the warfighting map against Nazi Germany. It was an important location. And America has looked at trying to purchase Greenland, or made like halfway attempts to purchase Greenland many times, going back to the like 1860s or something. Um, but ultimately, it doesn't work out. It's not that, like, prior to the Arctic melting, it's just like not that valuable. Um, and ultimately, having access to the Arctic itself doesn't really matter unless you're going to use military force to the exclusion of everybody else to just rape its natural resources. And last time I checked, that's not our plan, but that's probably going to fucking change. Like that probably is going to be our plan at a certain point here. Um, and so this whole like language and logic of thinking in terms of strategic choke points, it's the same with the Panama Canal. Like those senators just now that I showed you, they're talking about strategic choke points. They're like, China's gonna, we can't have China shutting down the Panama Canal, because then in a war it's going to take us like 10 extra weeks to get forces to Asia, or it would shut down our ability to do trade. But that is laughable. China has no ability. China doesn't control the Panama Canal, first of all, but China has no ability to shut it down or to lock it down or to control it. And China doesn't have an ability to project force all the way to Latin America. Like that is like geographically America's backyard. America's power projection advantage is way beyond China's. If China wanted to try and shut down the Panama Canal, America would be able to resolve that by force fairly quickly and decisively. It's a joke. And so what is the desire to control it? Well, it's these stories that the geopoliticians tell about choke points. But that's all that is conjuring up imagery of worst case scenarios where we get quote unquote strategic advantages in a war by already controlling it. But those are imaginaries and alternative futures where everybody loses, nobody wins, except for the people who are in charge of resources, except for a ruling class few, right? People in charge of the military and shit. So that's all fucked, And you're going to start seeing people saying this more and more because they're actually they're classical geopolitics is a coherent logic on its own terms. It's just a dark logic that is morally vacuous and that justifies, the worst of humanity. It's a justification framework for reactionary imperialist politics. Classical geopolitics is imperialism. And so when we see them talking in the language of geopolitics, like we have to recognize that is an imperialist language. That's an imperialist design. And that's how Greenland relates to the Panama Canal, relates to Taiwan. And these places are not actually strategic choke points. Nothing actually gets cut off if China were to control any, or like if any one power were to control any of these places. Like you could resolve that. You would have time to resolve that diplomatically and by force, So, anyways, this imperialist shit, the pattern is so evident with Trumperialism, right? An erasure of already existing colonial relations under Biden with Puerto Rico and with several Pacific Island nations. We have this land grab tactic, whether it's through purchase, possibly in the case of Greenland, or through dispossession, which is what the senators are talking about with Panama, right? We have the threat of forced assimilation with Canada and Mexico, where Trump wants to make them the 51st state. We have, which is ultimately like imposing foreign rule from a distant capital. We're dictating to more than 40% of the world's population with the BRICS currency tariff threat that Trump issued a week ago, right? BRICS nations comprise more than 40% of the world. Trump is already setting up rent-seeking arrangements from allies, NATO, South Korea, Japan. He wants payments from them, but he also wants to remove troops from those areas, which I'm not necessarily mad at, actually. But it's the rent-seeking. It's the rendering allies from being equals to being protectorates that is overtly imperial, right? And then the final attribute of imperialism, sphere of influence arrangements with the great powers, right? With China, with Russia, and with Turkey, he has signaled coming to terms that would come at the expense of others, with Ukraine, with Taiwan, Hong Kong, with Syria, where he said Turkey already controls most of Syria. So this is Trumperialism, friends. This is Trumperialism. And now we've got one Max Reed on the show. Welcome.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Let me get rid of this. Here we go. God damn it. There we go. All right. Max Reed of the Reed Max newsletter.
That's right. Owner, operator, proprietor, small business person.
You gotta sell those trinkets, man. Yeah, and you have the it's also called Reed Max, the podcast, right?
Kind of. I have an intermittent podcast when I shouldn't admit this, but when I haven't had anything to write about, then I can just turn on the microphone and talk for 10 minutes. Yeah, it's a media empire, I would say.
It's a great compliment. I find it hard myself to balance the like, how much do I do talk versus right. But yeah, I guess I'm doing more talk lately. But I reached out to you to come on the show because I have a bee in my bonnet about some of the new defense industrial stuff. There was a piece in the Financial Times about Palantir and Anduril joining forces to create like a new oligopoly. And in your newsletter, I love the newsletter Reed Max because readmax.com, is that the
Readmax or maxread.substack.com.
maxread.substack.com. It's got this like hybrid flavor of like, you talk about pop culture stuff and music and films, and there's a lot of like nostalgia bath 90s stuff, which is all to the good.
Yeah.
And then you sort of mix in these observations about our fasci drift in politics and talking about the tech oligarchy. You're very clear-eyed about the tech bros and the dystopian aspects of like what's going on. So yeah, so you're like the perfect guy to talk about all this.
I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, thank you. And that was such a good pitch for the newsletter too, for non-subscribers.
Should definitely subscribe. So, well, okay. So right before we jumped on this, like, I guess it was yesterday. I'm losing track of time. But Mark Zuckerberg, the face of Facebook slash Meta, he sort of did this open kimono mask off declaration of like rediscovering politics again. I can't remember what he said exactly, but he's kind of like signaling a hard right turn. Um, and I'm wondering what you think of his willingness to go from being not political, quote unquote, to being political, quote unquote.
Yeah. I mean, my knee-jerk reaction is sort of, I find it pretty contemptible. Like, I find it, it's so condescending. It's so, like, the contempt it displays on his part for me and for you and for, like, Americans, Facebook users, all these people, this kind of, sudden hard right swing, or not hard right, but sort of cultural right-wing swing. Um, but there was a good John Herman, who's one of my favorite tech writers, tech critics, wrote a great column about this yesterday, where he pointed out that this is like almost a ritual at this point, where in the wake of an election since 2016, every presidential election, within a month or so of the election itself, Zuckerberg has has given either an interview or made a big post where he's announced a kind of new direction or new idea about Facebook that tends to cohere with whichever way he thinks the political winds are blowing. So 2016 was when the fact checkers got
Of course.
set up. It was like this sort of, it was a sort of mea culpa about Facebook's role in the election of Trump, which is its own kind of interesting, like, that was a sort of a funny moment for Facebook, because it was they were caught between this, they didn't want to say Trump was our fault, but they also didn't want to, but they wanted to seem powerful and important and influential. So in some ways it was like a nice moment for them. 2021, in the wake of January 6th, he comes on and bans Trump from the platform and sort of is, a sort of announces himself implicitly as a Bidenist, more or less. And here he is, with his new sort of gold chain Dave Portnoy, like, masculinist, like, UFC thing going on, putting Dana White on the board. He's
That's
now,
a huge signal.
I know. And now he's saying, okay, no, actually, we're going back to our free speech roots. And as John points out in this piece, like, Facebook actually doesn't have free speech roots. Twitter can make a plausible claim to being a website that had like a strong institutional commitment to free speech from the very start, and certainly since the Arab Spring. But Facebook really has never had that commitment, has never demonstrated any interest in having that commitment. In fact, has almost always run away from politics at all turns. So it is just this, when I say, like, I feel contempt for it, it's the kind of nakedness of the play here, like that like, he's just making stuff up and expecting that we all kind of go along with it and go for it. And so far it seems like, I mean, obviously kind of right-wing influencers are eating it up, regardless of whether or not they themselves believe what he's selling. Like, they know that it's good content to be out there saying, to show your followers how much you guys are winning with Mark Zuckerberg bending the knee, so to speak. But I was noticing the New York Times headline about this is something to the effect of, like, this time Zuckerberg refuses to apologize, or something like that. And I thought it was like, I can't believe that it's reporters I like a lot, and I was sort of shocked to see them, like, I don't know, sort of hew to this to this framing of it, where it's like, where they take at face value this idea that what he's doing is like standing up for his values and his beliefs or whatever, and that it
Too
isn't just,
credulous. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, he is in fact apologizing. Like, what he, in fact, more than any other time before, he is apologizing now for having listened to the SJWs, and he's saying, actually, I never liked them in the first place, and I always wanted this. But I would say, I mean, the other thing I would say, so beyond this sort of like the hypocrisy of it all and the contemptibility of it all and all the things we can say, is like, I do think there's a kind of business interest here for Facebook beyond, like, even that isn't even, in the kind of indirect way that obviously Zuckerberg would really like Trump to drop any and all antitrust inquiries into Facebook, and he would like
Sure.
the government to not bother him, and he would like to, continue being like a powerful and influential business person. And this is obviously that's part of what's going on here. He's showing fealty to Trump, but it's also really been really clear for the last few years that Facebook is in a position where it needs to grow more, and it needs to
Mhm.
grow with high value advertising targets. And as it turns out, basically Americans are the only actually high value advertising targets on the planet. And Facebook has not really been growing with Americans very much at all. I'm simplifying sort of the trajectory here, but more or less the idea has always been once Facebook conquered America, it would conquer the globe. But the people around the world are not worth as much to advertisers as Americans are. And so Facebook is stuck with this problem of wanting to grow time on screen, number of users, all these different statistics among Americans. And a bunch of changes on Instagram, for example, like the addition of Reels, are sort of examples of this business incentive. And I do think there's something to the idea that, I mean, I'm joking, I'm like half joking, but I'm also serious that the only place Facebook can grow right now is like the amount of like racist old men posting on it. Like that's like the people, that's the way for
It's
them to
really
grow
good
among
for
Americans
that. Yeah.
posting. And it's sort of like they're not going to get, I mean, they're not even going to get, you and I are middle-aged men at this point, and they're not going to get, we're not going to go back on it. They're not going to get young people. Young people are gone on TikTok. Maybe they can get them on Instagram. But if you want like the Facebook platform itself, like that's where your opportunity for growth is. And so I think there is something like this is both like a power politics, like let's make nice with the Trump administration thing. But I do think there's also a kind of, direct business incentive here to like say like, okay, let's become exciting again for the people who are the most addicted to computer and the most addicted to posting and so on. I mean, I don't know. We'll see, what he said, like how much of what he's saying right now and how much of these new rules, how much they actually affect the average user's experience of Facebook.
Mhm.
Because a lot of it is like when I sign onto Facebook these days, it's like AI bullshit, like posts from pages I've never seen before. Like some of it is political, some of it's not. I'm like, it doesn't really feel like unlike Twitter, where there was a relatively coherent kind of experience that has been totally discombobulated by the Musk takeover. Like there hasn't been a coherent Facebook experience for probably a decade, and so I don't
Yeah.
see how new rules are going to change that in any way. It's hard to say, oh, it's going to be so different from this like completely insane thing that it is right now.
Yeah, I don't know that. I mean, in terms of like Meta's bottom line, I'm not sure Facebook even matters that much relative to Instagram, which was just the purchase that keeps them being relevant, I suppose. Like,
Yeah. I mean, Facebook still chugs along with the sort of unsexy demographics. Like it is like still a big moneymaker for them among boomers, like it's not relevant, as you say, but it is like it's there and it makes money and they can like I mean, I don't know. This is all kind of guessing around the edges. I suspect too, frankly, like we shouldn't discount the possibility that Mark Zuckerberg is in fact like feeling reactionary. Like he's feeling his oats, he's feeling reactionary. He's been dealing with a restive employee population for a long time. He's been insulted by, I'm sure he feels grievously insulted by Democrats and the left. Like,
he is there's no question in my mind he's a reaction. So he's just I'm not going to say too much about this because I have personal ties to it, but there is a bunch of former Republican strategist guys and people who worked for John McCain who became comms people for Facebook before Trump even came to power.
Mm,
And they really leaned in to, trying to curry favor with Trump when he was in power. And then like you said, like he's basically just goes the way the wind blows. But
yeah.
like that suggests that like he was feeling his right-wing oats. He was recognizing the natural tendency for the oligarchs and the ethno-nationalists to kind of
Yeah,
clasp
exactly.
hands. Yeah. Also, like 4 months ago, 5 months ago, Trump had like went on CNN and it said like Zuckerberg should face life in prison. Like, and I feel like if you're Zuck, you probably
Oh
have that
yeah.
filed in the back of your head somewhere.
Totally. I mean, it's the same thing as like all the Trump bluster over tariffs, where it is like, you want to call it canny negotiation because it's like the dumbest possible form of negotiation, but you just are facing a bunch of people who are sort of like, this is not worth to me the stand that I would need to take to like find out if you're serious. So I'm just going to capitulate because it kind of works. It like works for me too anyway. And so why
Mhm.
not? And then Trump can claim his big victory and you can get what you were looking for in the first place. So yeah, I mean, I mean, I find it so is as so many like developments in business and politics. I just find it, as an American, I find it embarrassing. I find myself embarrassed to be a citizen. I find myself embarrassed to be a voter, embarrassed to be like, of the same nation as these people, this system, this whatever. It just sucks.
Yeah, no, I get it. Weirdly about Facebook, like so I'm sitting in New Zealand now, and face as low, mid, unpopular as Facebook is, just generally, here it's a kind of social architecture, like a lot of business and like small business community stuff and like associations with stuff you do with your kids and all of that, like finding out about just general safety crime stuff in the neighborhood, all of that is one-stop shopping at Facebook, and there's no alternative platform.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it is like it has that. I mean, I find it. There's a
Americans
quote.
don't seem to use it that way, but like
I mean,
outside of the
I think
US.
some of them do. I mean, there's a kind of like it exists in fits and starts in places like Instagram certainly has that role, like for a lot of businesses, like especially that target people 50 and under. Say, like if you
Mm,
have a cool restaurant, you got to have an Instagram page, and that's where you put announcements and whatever else. I mean, it is really interesting to me that we have this, like Facebook has sort of, after having been a huge topic about in the sense of disinformation and its role. I mean, I wrote a New York Magazine piece in 2016 about its, or 2017, I suppose, about the company's like kind of outsized role in politics and all these things. And it kind of disappeared because its relevance just stopped. It stopped being relevant in the same way to like to journalists and to even to politicians and other people. But I think it still has that pretty like that sort of essential infrastructural role, if not for like all Americans, maybe not even a majority of Americans, but for a lot of Americans. And as you say, for like people all over the world, especially once you include WhatsApp, like between WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook, it does feel like basically everybody who has an internet connection on the globe uses one of those three apps in an effectively infrastructural way. Like it like could not replace it if it was deleted. And that is a lot of power. Like that, even if it's not sexy in the way it once was, or even if it's not like at the tip of everyone's tongue as a sort of moral panic, it is like it's real and it's meaningful for Zuckerberg to be signaling a sort of willingness, to compromise with Trump. And like not to. I think you have to take all kinds of claims about Facebook at face value. I mean, sorry, with a sprinkle of salt, I suppose. That people get overwhelmed once they start to like imagine its scale and its size and whatever.
mhm,
But there are people who have been like, I think this was in Casey Newton's newsletter that I was reading. This is people who have been on the trust and safety teams who are talking about like a lot of the times we talk about the sort of free speech stuff on Facebook, free speech in a million air quotes, but the free speech stuff on Facebook as the question of, for example, like what has recently come out is Facebook is now allowing you to call people mentally ill on the basis of being gay. That you can say that all gay people
cool.
are crazy for being gay. It's like literally
Finally,
it's in their code. They're like, you are
finally.
allowed to say this. And that is obviously awful, but like in terms of real world like direct harm, not that that's not harmful, but like in terms of like incitement to violence,
Directing
there's all these
violence, yeah.
other things that go on, and that we've seen already in countries around the world that like content moderation and like fairly strict rules around speech are really important so that a team can intervene as a rumor starts flying on WhatsApp, as a lynch mob starts forming on Facebook, to slow the reach of that post, to make sure that it's not like getting I don't know, all over the place, that it's not reaching all the people who might act on it or whatever. And if
Mhm,
Zuck is really doing what he says he's doing in terms of sort of taking a hands-off approach and ignoring this, like that is where I think we start to see the most immediate and grievous effect. Probably less like in US kind of discourse or whatever, because as we've been saying, like it's not that relevant to whatever. But in countries that are, where it's already being used as in this kind of infrastructural way, and where it is likely to play a role in incitements to violence like that.
Yeah. So Zuck is one version of the billionaire tech oligarch problem. There are others, and so like the nexus of like crypto and AI and the defense industry is this giant ball of wax that is just calling out for like greater sense making. Like
Yeah.
I think I told you in the email, like when the whole Sam Bankman-Fried, the fraudster scam, fucking like when crypto was sort of revealed. So I've always viewed crypto as a scam, just like full disclosure. And then when it turns out that one of the biggest crypto guys was literally a fraudster scamster guy, it was like, okay, let's fucking dial it back, right?
Let's wrap this up. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, I fucking told you, friends, and then, but then crypto-backed super PACs spent $134 million on 68 races in the election. They succeeded in 85% of them, which is like APAC level batting average. So like, how do you, and then like Mark Andreessen, the VC guy, the billionaire, he's a crypto hawk. He went on some podcast. He was calling for a reverse FDR, which is to say like fascism. I mean, he was calling for like a reactionary monarchy,
Yeah.
How do you make sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been fascinated because, like you, I sort of thought I was under the impression that not just SBF and FTX, getting exposed, but that occurred right at the end of ZIRP, at the end of zero interest rate protocol, and so we had rates rising, and I had this theory. I wasn't alone, that like a lot of the crypto bubble was froth because money was easy to get your hands on. I mean, people were sitting at home with the pandemic, like credit was loose. Everybody had people had stimmy checks in their wallets, whatever. Here was an easy way to like gamble it, to make money, whatever. But then as rates went up, it became pretty clear that the bubble wasn't popping. It seemed like what actually had ended was Web3. Like you could disaggregate Web3, which was the kind of 2021 circa 2021 attempted sort of attempt to make like a use case argument for crypto.
Everything I learned about Web3, I learned from your newsletter, by the way.
Well, okay, if you want to go back and read about it, but the
Not
thing
that
is,
it mattered, but
it's so dead. Nobody. But what's crazy making about it is that nobody is out there talking about Web3 apps, talking about this is the new internet, like crypto is the foundation of the new internet. Nobody is making any kind of use case argument for cryptocurrencies at all anymore. It seems to be they are purely speculative assets. In fact, that's part of the fun. Like the big website last year was pump.fun, where people would just create meme coins. They'd live stream themselves. Like a guy set himself on fire.
Oh my God.
Shooting like he doused himself in isopropyl alcohol and was shooting letting somebody shoot bottle rockets at him, like on live stream, in order to pump his, like the coin that he was doing. The world of it is I mean, again, incredibly depressing and sort of fascinating. And I think that, so like, that's the sort of bottom end of the like retail investor crypto mania. And then and one reason that I think that market perpetuates is that much of the oligarchs we're talking about, Elon Musk chief among them, but most of them have pretty significant holdings in crypto. So they have an incentive to allow and push, like, keeping its values as high as possible. And what I find, I don't know if frightening is the right word, is that, increasingly big institutional investors have pretty significant crypto holdings too. And like, at that point, I have tried to take, and I caveat that I haven't like fully looked at the numbers. I can't, I don't want to make too wild claims here. I've tried to take the position that sort of, look, crypto isn't, it isn't too big to fail. It's not deeply connected to like the real nexus of finance. If the bubble pops, we're not in a 2008 situation. But as big institutional investors continue to buy up crypto, and as crypto continues to grow and stay high, pumped along by both the retail investors at the bottom, but also by oligarchs at the top continuing to buy, then we become in a situation that we put ourselves in a situation where it's not clear what the exit looks like. Because again, these it's not like stocks. There is no like future cash flow that you're looking forward to or whatever. They're just like Bitcoin maximalists have this idea of Bitcoin being the replacement currency, but beyond that, it's sort of there's nothing going on there. So what I worry about, like the specific worry I have, I should say, is that, and they talk about this a lot. You hear a lot of talk about this from like I think Marsha Blackburn, who's the like crypto friendly Montana senator, who
Yeah.
is pushing like a US crypto reserve, which I think needs to be understood first and foremost as an opportunity for guys like Musk and Andreessen to offload their crypto at the highest possible prices, and basically leave the government as the bag holder, which is like a disastrous possibility. I think
It's
that's
not that there's some US American national interest advantage in a strategic crypto reserve. It's
no.
using the government and the power of the state to create that opportunity to sell for
Yeah,
those
exactly.
white rich holders of crypto.
Right. And then once they're out, like what is propping it up? What keeps it up? I mean, I don't know. This is like I do kind of think the crypto guys are kind of right that they've created a new market. It's like but I don't, but like its contours are not really clear, and it's not new in like a productive way. It's not like
It's a
creating
tulip
new.
market. Like,
Yeah. I mean, it's like this is like, is it a same old bubble, and it just it's gonna pop. It's gonna pop in a really dangerous and volatile and violent way, or is it like is it a new kind of bubble? I don't know. I mean, this is one of the things that makes me a little nervous. I get nervous because I see a lot of Democrats, and I can even be willing to sort of like read this generously, like Democrats thinking, how can we be crypto friendly? How can we? And I get the impulse because I think because this is for a lot of like young men, which is obviously the demographic with whom Democrats have been having a lot of trouble lately.
mhm.
With a lot of young men, this is like the most important issue. Is like I always think about it as like their top issue in life is the right to lose money on an app. Like gambling apps, crypto apps,
Yeah.
whatever, like their absolute freedom to just lose a shitload of money making really stupid bets. And it is of course incredibly tempting for Democrats to try to like step in, Democrats nominally the like responsible party, to step in and be like, yes, we will let you lose money on these apps. We are the crypto party. We do support this kind of thing. And I think this is like precisely one of those moments where this is going to end very badly for all those people who are pushing for their own right to lose money. This is like a moment to be a little bit paternalistic, or if not paternalistic, at least to like draw a line in the sand and say like, this is bullshit. Like this is not something we're going to get on board with, even if it costs us votes in this context, because if and when it does end badly, like you don't want to have torched your own as a party. I mean, like as a 39-year-old, the only political event that I ever think about is the Iraq War. But like to me, this is the exact same. Like, do not torch your credibility on what is obviously going to be a world historical disaster, because like somebody is going to need to pick up the pieces. And if you can demonstrate that you were in the right position, like then you are going to be in a much better position to like shape the order that comes after. I'm not a Democratic strategist. Like nobody has to listen to me. But that is the kind of thing where it's like when you watch both parties sort of triangulate around like what seems so obviously to me at least to be a disaster, it gets pretty worrisome.
Yeah, well, the short-termist calculation, like electoral type calculations, are leading Democrats, or they did in 2024, led Democrats to demagoguing basically in favor of crypto,
Yeah.
taking that sweet Sam Bankman-Fried money, metaphorically, and like that. Where does that leave us? Not only did we not actually benefit electorally from that,
Yeah.
but now they're like in power and colluding with Trump in real time.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw the Mark Andreessen the other day. He shared this graph about the like historic decline of tariffs, and he was like, never have we been so innovative as in the 19th century when we had sky high tariffs, and like everyone was just fucking dunking on them and shit, and it was actually quite grand. But the grim thing was that it was hilarious, except that these are the guys in power,
Yeah.
and all we can do is laugh and cry and shit and make fun of
Exactly.
them.
Yeah, I know. There's nothing. There's no lever you can pull.
Yeah. Um, Chat says, how would you guys feel about an AI Pol Pot? I don't know what that means, but I would feel not good about it. I mean,
Yeah, it's 3 words I don't like to see in a
I
row, I
know.
suppose.
That's kind of like what Israel's Lavender program was, like it's AI poll pot.
Identifying
Um,
guys with glasses from afar in order
fuck,
to destroy them,
yeah.
yeah.
This guy's brown. So what do you think of so crypto to Trump administration? The segue maybe is the Doge boys. How do they fit into this, right?
I'm just interested in them as a kind of, like, the return of the Reagan era Republican. I'm not sure how to put it exactly, but, like, we heard so much in Trump's first term and even during Biden's term about the end of neoliberalism and the kind of, like,
Oh, yeah.
we're in an era of industrial policy and, national conservatism and whatever, and so it's, like, not surprising, I suppose, but quite telling that, like, by far the most public and, like, sort of attention grabbing initiative of the Trump administration in waiting has been this kind of sideshow of, like, I mean, again, like, as so much of my content is like 90s nostalgia, but how much is like the Doge, like, when they put their little tweets with their whatever they're called, with their, like, infographics or whatever, it feels like USA Today articles are like, like email forwards from 1998, sort of like, did you know the government spent eight? Like, I genuinely don't feel like that rhetoric has sort of been out of fashion for 20
Yeah.
years, probably. Like, I haven't, you didn't hear that much about like the government was studying underwater basket weaving and they charged like $8 million or whatever. And I think there's a kind of, like it's revealing about what the extent to which the Republican Party really has not changed very much at all. But I think it's also revealing about like the limits of the sort of so-called accelerationism and like sort of supposed obsession with growth and like technological development and advancement on the part of people like Musk, that their chief priority really seems to be like cutting government assistance and cutting government waste or whatever. I mean, it's obviously like very funny that they haven't really grappled with it at all, that they don't they really clearly don't have a sense at all of like where like budget money goes, and like the very real political reasons why nobody has ever succeeded in like cutting the budget, because like so much of it goes to the VA and so much of it goes to Social Security and these like
Mhm.
completely politically untouchable like lock boxes effectively. But I don't know, there's there is like it is in keeping with the Andreessen, like the Hooverism, like the pre FDR, the kind of like true classical liberal, like they're gonna cut the government down to the bone. Like heroic entrepreneurs will, like, if there's going to be development and if we're going to accelerate into the future, it's going to be purely on the part of heroic entrepreneurs spending out of their own pockets. Um, I don't know. I mean, like, this is all, if I can live out for a minute here, like so much of what the 20th century demonstrated to us is how quickly and how amazingly we can advance science if there is like enormous amounts of public infrastructural spending behind it, of like
Mhm.
actual like meritocratic public money. Now, also if there is a defense, also if there's a defense interest in
There was a
advancing
dark
science
side
in
to
that
it, but
way.
sure, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The
And if you have a lot
idea
of
was
Nazis that you brought over from Germany or
yeah.
whatever. But I do think there's like just it's funny to me that Musk can't even get the sort of like most positive lib version of the story. It's like, let's fund NASA, let's fund the JPL, let's like, let's even like let's bring back Bell Labs or some like quasi public like research and development organization. It's just this kind of, let's cut money from my enemies and I alone will develop things based on my own prerogatives. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of boring to talk about because it is really familiar, right? It is like, okay, we're back, it's the 90s again. It's a little bit Ron Paul, it's a little bit Ayn Rand, like sort of objectivist stuff. And
Well,
all that.
the
Yeah.
the chat says Doge has a very gross kitchen cabinet feel, like crossed with the 1933 business plot. And so it's
Yeah,
like,
that's
yeah,
a very
like,
good way of putting it. Yeah.
it's like this is going to facilitate anti-regulation, which is to say facilitate like monopoly capital in a way, like
Yeah, totally.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like it. It feels like they've kind of already shot themselves in the foot. Like, I feel like they I don't hear there was like a month there where I was hearing about them constantly, and then Musk is now on a crusade to support Andrew Tate and Tommy Robinson taking over the UK government. So his
Brilliant.
attention is elsewhere, which means that everybody else's attention is suddenly elsewhere too. So I wonder if we'll see it back, or if they've been told to stop tweeting about it because it's become clear that this is just like a politically unfeasible project.
Well, it seems like if you're going to have an institution or a mechanism that's going to just gut the technocratic class that keeps your power in check, that you are probably better off not talking publicly about what you're going to do to them, and you just quietly do it. I mean, like
Yeah.
my concern with a lot of like the schizophrenic attention of the Trump grift landscape is that, like, sure, the media might jump around from thing to thing, and sure, the attention span of Trump or Elon or whatever might jump around from thing to thing, but like each grift is going to keep proceeding whether
Yeah.
there's media attention on it or not.
Oh
you
yeah,
know?
the gears are still turning. You just can't hear them anymore, or you're not looking at them anymore, or whatever. I think
Yeah.
that's almost certainly true. I mean, part of it is like, I so much of this to me feels like, how can you bring to Trump's attention that the things Elon is proposing are really unpopular? Because deep down, at the end of the day, like, Trump is a very good politician, and he understands, he understands what are no-go issues and what things he shouldn't touch. And like, I'm of the school that one reason he won in 2016 is he very smartly recognized that he should not talk at all about cutting Medicare and Social Security. And in fact, he should say he was never going to cut Medicare and Social Security and all
Yeah.
these things that had been, these sort of Republican albatrosses for such a long time. And so, like, these gears are turning in the back, but they all still have to filter through like Trump's media diet. So if Joe Scarborough gets wind of the fact that, Social Security is getting cut in some way, and brings it like, it's like, I'm not the first person to make this as the most cliched metaphor, but it has this like King's Court thing where it's like, can you get the right people on Trump's TV to like get his attention that something bad is about to happen that is going to like hurt his political chances? Is a very funny kind of like, it's it's such a fucked up media environment.
Yeah. Um, the thing that like catalyzed this whole live thing we're doing right now was this Financial Times piece called Palantir and Anduril join forces with tech groups to bid for Pentagon. There's a little excerpt that I'll read here, and I want to just open your thoughts to it. It says, Palantir and Anduril, two of the largest U.S. defense tech companies, they're in talks with about a dozen competitors to form a consortium that will jointly bid for U.S. government work in an effort to disrupt the country's oligopoly of prime contractors, which is like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, et cetera. Companies in the talks to join this consortium include Elon Musk's SpaceX, ChatGPT maker OpenAI, autonomous shipbuilder Saronic, and Scale AI. Defense tech startups have attracted record amounts of funding this year as investors bet that they will be among the winners of higher federal spending on national security, immigration, and space exploration under Trump. I have thoughts about this. What do you make of this?
I mean, I actually would be really interested to hear your thoughts, because my impression for a long time, as somebody who's not like a defense industry reporter and sort of knows these more as tech companies and related to the tech scene, is that um Anduril and the sort of Palmer Luckey projects, that they were like basically sort of jokes to the DoD, that the DoD was like, not like, they were happy to like throw them a little money and like take meetings or whatever, but like they were not big dogs. They weren't really working on stuff that was like that worked very well or was that interesting to them. And so, they were like they were almost like make work projects to get Palmer Luckey to like not tweet annoyingly about the Pentagon or whatever. Like, that's the, like, if the Pentagon was run by the smartest people in the world, like, that's the way I would think about it. And so I can't tell if I had the wrong impression in the first place, or if or this is the beginning of them sort of like actually trying to make themselves into a real thing, that maybe by sort of joining forces in this way that they can rival a Lockheed or a Boeing, that there is like a chance to like vie for those contracts in the same way. I mean, from the tech side, my impression has always kind of been, this is, we talked before about the end of easy money. Like,
Mhm.
the VC game is very different now than it was in 2010, 2015. There are fewer unicorns. The exits are harder to come by. The money is less free. there hasn't been a Facebook in a really long time, and so I think a lot of investors are looking for companies that can sort of guarantee pretty cushy, like, income streams from, say, government contracts. Like that's a pretty attractive business to be in. And it's like, I think this is a sort of a chicken and egg thing between the reactionary turn on the part of a lot of these guys and the sort of money making opportunities associated with it. But they
Mhm.
go hand in hand, that you can be a Republican and you can be a patriot and you can make a lot of money by selling killer drones to the Pentagon. And so, like, in some sense, this sort of, like, consortium, putting together a consortium, is just a natural evolution of that tendency. And somebody like Malcolm Harris would say, like, this also isn't new. Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
Dick Packard, they've been defense contractors since the 1940s. So it's
Yeah.
also like, this is deep, deep, deep in their blood. So that's also, like, worth remembering and saying. I do recommend. I don't know if you've read it. Vanity Fair did a nice profile of El Segundo, which is where a lot of these companies are based in, and they call it the Gundo. And there's all
Yeah.
these, like, these broy 20 somethings building, like, drones and hanging out and popping in, and, like, Sam Biddle called it the military's industrial complex, which I thought was very
It's
good.
fucking great.
But yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing. What do you think of it?
Well, so I worked in the Pentagon in the latter Obama years, and I was literally a strategist, and like our little group of like-mindeds was like, our job was to literally like imagine what the future of war is going to be. And so like it's much darker than what it sounds like, even. But
Yeah.
it was also, at the time, I thought it was very sexy, and I have laments now. But like, anyways, the part of that was like, we started making bets based on like secular tech trends,
Hmm.
that the future of war was going to be moved toward autonomous weapons systems, and the pointy end of those weapon systems was going to be robotics in various forms, drones. And so the way of warfare was probably going to change to be more AI driven and drone powered,
Yeah.
unmanned. And so a bunch of us, not me, uh, migrated to Silicon Valley after the Obama years and literally went to work at Palantir and Anduril and
Hmm.
SpaceX. And and then that connective tissue, that social connective tissue, reached back into the like Washington think tank world. And of
Yeah.
course, as you know, Washington think tanks is where the political appointee talent for each new administration largely comes from. And so, like, the collusion of public private in the defense industry was like kind of reborn in that moment in a new
Yeah.
way that wasn't just Northrop Grumman, you know.
Yeah. Right.
Um, Not that these tech firms are small, like Palantir's market cap is bigger than Lockheed Martin, I think. But like the my like I don't know what you think of this. My theory is that like the VCs have had nowhere to invest to grow for a long time, like no reliable place to bet, and they want the next unicorn. So they made that bet as AI, which they're over leveraged in. And the most realistic use case for AI is selling to the national security state, which
Yeah.
is the Palantir business model, and then AI powers the drones that Anduril makes. And like, so you start seeing this coalescing of the vision of future war because of the material incentives of the like billionaire class and
Yeah.
the new defense industrialists and the people in the national security state whose vision like helps, make it all kind of go together. And so the rise of great power competition and conflict, and like even in that Financial Times piece, where is it, there was a line, they say wars in Ukraine and the Middle East and geopolitical tensions between the US and China have heightened the government's reliance on tech companies developing advanced AI products that can be used for military purposes. And so like, these are what, like, why is AI what is it like, okay, so you see bombs going off in one part of the world, or you see that like, there's gunboat diplomacy happening in East Asia or something. where's the like why AI? You know, like
Yeah. Right. Right. And the answer is because we got a lot of it and we need to sell it to somebody. We ordered a few crates of AI and we got to give the AI somewhere. No, I think that's totally right. That clicks a lot of things. I mean, it has that and it's a it's an even more specific version of like a sort of classic like business story where you're just looking for a buyer of last resort for this thing that you've invested in, and the government is there. And if you have the right connections and you've shaken the right hands and you were at the same think tanks or the same Pentagon programs, you can make it happen. um I mean, it's very it's I think there's like one other element that is like sort of tangential. It like doesn't it, which is I think there's a labor story here too, which is and we didn't mention it when we were talking about Facebook, but I think this is a really important part of like what's happening with Zuckerberg and company, which is that the 2010s with 2010s revealed that the sort of tech workforce, if not the tech management or investor class,
mhm,
was relatively left wing and relatively liberal. And I think like one of the more galvanizing moments in the kind of tech organizing story of the late 2010s was Google walkouts over government contracts. And
that's right.
that same thing has happened in Microsoft, it's happened in Amazon. And I think that regardless of the specific politics of military contracts, like these guys do not want a restive labor force. And especially because like these are really high leverage workers. Like these are not big by employee, these are not big companies. And every single employee has a lot of power within the system to
Mhm.
stop things from happening. And I think one reason that Zuckerberg is turning right now is like, yes, a sort of direct personal reaction to that experience. It's also, I think that there has been the labor market's a lot looser than it was in, say, 2017. That there has been a glut of STEM graduates. There's been a set of layoffs at all of these companies. It's much
Surplus
harder to find.
techies. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I think that part of what's happening with the defense companies is like I don't know how intentional this is, but I think an effect of it, say, is creating a STEM workforce that is like by definition not going to unionize, or certainly like not going to object to government contracts. Like you're
Ah,
sort of growing a generation of engineers,
yeah.
roboticists, programmers who are self-selecting into like defense technology. And I don't know if that's like maybe that's just a happy accident, sort of like, but I do think that one reason there's so much joy on the VC side for these companies, in addition to the sort of sense that like this is a nice, stable income flow that we're going to be getting from government contracts, is like, and we're building businesses that we're not going to have to deal with like, walkouts because they have government contracts. And also, frankly, like again, most likely these are not businesses that are going to be eager for HR for like they're probably not going to unionize. They're probably not going to be complaining about DEI. Like they are mostly a right wing workforce, conservative sort of at the most moderate. And so there's like I think in many cases somebody like Andreessen would sort of just like to rebuild the tech industry like in El Segundo, say, as like this new kind of like macho right wing, you know,
Patriotic. Yeah.
patriotic, like culturally, no purple haired programmers here, like no they them's here, like it's just men and Zin and like whatever else. I mean, and they're not going to be successful because like you do like they're for all the reasons that you can imagine. But I think that it explains a lot of like the enthusiasm, like the personal sort of enthusiasm for it.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that scares me about this, which converges with more with my like where I came from originally, or like what I spend my day job doing, like if 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 your bottom line requires a more overtly sort of nationalistic foreign policy and you benefit materially and you formed a cartel with other defense tech firms, a cartel meant to sell into collude basically with the Pentagon. And it's basically like this anti-competitive oligopoly. Like it, if you're doing that and you benefit from a larger defense budget, one that keeps growing, and political power is aligned in that in a way that favors that, the stars have aligned. You want a patriotic workforce, surplus labor makes the purple haired techies, redundant or replaceable or whatever, and you're advocating for this vision of the world that is pretty dark, and it's like nationalist billiard balls clashing on the table of world politics, which just happens to like benefit ethno nationalists everywhere, and then like and then to meet that world where it is, you of course need a bigger and bigger and bigger defense budget. You
Right.
move
Yeah.
closer and closer toward the singularity of what the defense strategists imagined the future of war to be. You can't I don't see how you can keep going in that direction, which we are currently on and going 100 miles an hour without the World War III part happening. Like,
Yeah.
how long do you play that shell game before everything fucking explodes,
Yeah. I mean, there's no, I mean, this is like, we're at the darkest moment. Like, there is no, it's very, like, it is very, like, I'm trying to remind myself, there's like a lot to come. Like, we're at the sort of dreams moment for all of these guys. There's just like but it doesn't feel, certainly doesn't feel, as we were saying before, like the Democrats as an oppositional party are up to any kind of job. I mean, they're 100% on board with this.
They're the
Biden
party of the national security state now. I mean,
yeah, exactly. And I mean, and I, like, there was a good piece just to tie it back to Musk. Henry Farrell, who's a very
oh yeah.
smart thinker on these issues, wrote the other day about like the sort of real disinformation, what he thinks of as like the true problem of disinformation with a platform like Twitter, say, which is that it's not so much that you're like individually misinforming a single voter who now has the false beliefs or whatever. It's that insofar as Twitter can be seen as like a mirror of the world, and we know that it's not a mirror of the world, but I think most of us have always sort of treated it as a way to look at a particular kind of sensibility or a slice of public opinion. If you, to the extent that you can turn it in one particular direction, like a racist, a cruel, a racist, an atomized kind of like awful little terrible little tabloid thing, you can create like a sense among all of us that like that is how Americans are right now, and that's how Americans are thinking right now, which is both going to tilt people further in that direction and also like sap the ability of anybody to like show opposition, right? Because you sort of are like, well, I signed on Twitter today and it was just fucking awful. And it was like everybody was like a ton of enormous racists, and the ones who weren't racist think we should kill homeless people. And that was just 2 seconds on the website or whatever. And so I think there's this interest. There's like they've taken power, but there's also the sort of like the scary thing about the platforms for me is the way they're trying now. And I think this is maybe part of what's going on with Zuckerberg, intentionally or not, whatever, like to foreclose opposition, not even in the sense of like censoring it, but just of sort of making it drown in the noise, of making it feel like a drop in the bucket against a wave of like true sentiment or whatever. And that's that's like just on a personal affective like daily experience level, that sucks so hard to like just be constantly greeted by bile everywhere you turn, on Instagram, on Twitter, on wherever else, because what you get is like the worst kinds of sentiments that are most valued by your Elon Musk, because those are the ones that give him the most leverage in positions of power. I don't know, that's a little bit like blue sky, a little bit beyond like where we're going, but it occurs to me, when you say the darkness is sort of coming, the darkness is rolling in, that we've like locked in on a particular trajectory, like that is also the effect that's being like created by these platforms and the men who own them.
Yeah, I mean, the other side of it too, or like another layer, the idea of surveillance capitalism is not new. There was that big book a few years ago about it, and like the dystopian version the imagery that people have in their head is that like it's digital totalitarian control or whatever. You can't express yourself and that kind of thing. I think the scarier version that seems much more realistic is basically like these platforms have total surveillance capacity within their platforms and cookies, tracking, but like it's like, say whatever the fuck you want, but we're going to take what you say, and if it's offensive or you're our political enemy, then we go after you. So we use what remains after the Doge boys deconstruct the state or reconfigure the state for their purposes. what remains of the state will be the weapon or the club that goes after you
Yeah.
for having done free expression on platforms that we fully surveillance control, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that it feels exactly like it's like a closed loop, like a system that works, that just is ready to like, ready to be used against all of us, basically.
They're letting me dig my grave on this show. And you too. Um,
Yeah.
man. Okay. Well, um, I don't feel great about this, but I
I
didn't
know.
expect to. This was fun.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you, Vin.
Yeah, thanks for this.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'll package this up and the live version will float out there in the universe as well. But
Amazing.
yeah. Well, okay, thanks. You don't need to do anything. You can just like jump off.
Alright, I will.
And yeah. All right. Thanks,
Alright.
dude.
See you,
Read
man. It was
Max.
good
Read
talking.
Max. All right. So remaining folks, I have to actually get to an appointment. My kid is got swim lessons. It's summer in New Zealand, although you wouldn't know it based on the weather. So I just want to raid somebody's channel, and who should it be? Let's see what's available here. Um, James from the internet, maybe. Let's see if it works. Yes, it's gonna work, babies. I hope you guys liked this episode. It was a fun chat. Subscribe to Read Max, Max Reads newsletter. All right. Take care, friends.